Hi, this is Dan, First Person Looter, and this is my reaction to the first episode of HBO's television show adaptation of The Last of Us video game of the same title. I remember watching a YouTube playthrough of the first 20 minutes of the game and stopping after that because it was so good I just wanted to play it myself. Not that I had a PS3 nor a PS4, and I didn't think I would have one for a long time, but that opening was so good I was willing to wait until I could play it myself. No matter how long. It would be years before I could play it. It was 2021, actually. What a time to play a game about an infection. Right when COVID was making its case. I love the game. I beat it twice. Once on a regular playthrough, another on Grounded. I know there's people that play it so much that they make a living playing only this game. Speedrunning and finding out-of-bounds secrets. And flying to LA to play the game next to the stars of the game. I'm not saying I'm the most familiar with the game of anyone out there, but I know it pretty well. I pre-ordered The Last of Us Part 2, the first of only 3 games I've ever pre-ordered to date, Stray and Hogwarts Legacy being the other 2. I played the second game a couple of times as well. I loved it. It's a painful game due to story and subject matter, but I loved it. And while I had never heard of Troy Baker before, I hadn't played many games, so I wasn't familiar with video game actors, I was familiar with Ashley Johnson, because while I knew her from several TV and movie roles, her performance in The Pity Card was my absolute favorite. It's a 2006 short film comedy directed by Mr. Show, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, Nobody star Bob Odenkirk, and was about a guy who takes a girl on a first date to a Holocaust museum, and somehow she had never heard of the Holocaust and is completely broken and distraught about the history. Anyway, I would follow multiple Twitter accounts that documented the making of The Last of Us TV show. I was very excited. I've made films myself, obviously on a micro budget that isn't even in the same stratosphere as anything HBO has ever done, but I understand what goes into filmmaking. I waited patiently for the final result, excited but not letting the excitement send me into a tizzy. I avoided as much spoilers as I could. I didn't want to see too much footage, although I did see the very first trailer. I didn't want to watch cast and crew interviews. I didn't want to see any other clips of any other scenes. I heard some things were changed, but I didn't want to know the details of what was changed or added. And now, here we are. The first episode was released. What I think? I will break it down scene by scene. Scene 1. The very first scene is a change from the game. In the game, we open to Joel and Sarah's house the night of the outbreak. In the show here, we open up with a title card, 1968. What? I knew there would be changes, but at the very first second? Okay. It sort of gave me the Joker vibes or Zodiac, not just because it's a retro talk show with cigarettes being smoked on TV, but because of the dark atmosphere surrounding it, the muted and two-toned colors. I was definitely taken aback by the sudden and severe change from the game, and already I began wondering what the filmmakers were thinking. Not in a, what the hell were they thinking with this here? Sort of way, but in a, interesting, this is different. I'm curious to know why the show's doing this. I'm sure we'll know more as the show goes on. But I'd also like to know if the filmmakers had either fans of the game and or viewers brand new to the story in mind here. Being so familiar with the game myself, seeing something so different kind of knocked my brain out a bit. I got a bit distracted pondering these questions. Did the filmmakers know that the fans of the game may get distracted at the beginning, trying to focus on something brand new after expecting to see something else? Then I saw the host. I was distracted again. It's Big Head from Silicon Valley. Another distraction. Now I'm thinking about a different show and thinking about the ignorance of Big Head and started to perhaps project that character's ignorance onto this character. And while it was a distraction at first, it did kind of fit here eventually because the scene is about a host, an audience, and an epidemiologist guest who are all totally ignorant of the possible inevitable fungus infection outbreak that Dr. Newman was talking about. The scene was interesting, maybe a little too slow-paced. Shows usually start off with a bang. I wasn't sure how I felt about the constantly slow-moving camera. What was the camera motivation other than to perhaps keep up a visual interest because it's so dialogue heavy, but I did at least like how they chose to cut to the first close-up at the most important part of the scene. But what if that were to change, he asks. And I love how the shot looks as if they used a wider lens and physically brought the camera up to him. That gives an unnerving, intrusive feel, like he's actually leaning into us to get serious and we can't move ourselves back anymore because the back of our heads are pressed against the back of our couch. It was sort of a lot of exposition, just talking about the plot rather than showing it, but it was interesting information. I'm sure it made clear to all viewers, both those that played and didn't play the game, what this particular version of the story was setting up. Still, I must say in all honesty that I like the way the game, and indeed other Outbreak movies have started, better than this. They usually place you with a character who has no idea what's going on as the outbreak really breaks out, which this show does too a bit later, but still those other shows haven't broken down exactly what's going on for the viewer, so they can be as confused and as scared as the character. Maybe that's because when they do it in Night of the Living Dead, all audiences already know what's going on because it's so popular. Most people know the "when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth" quote. But even in something like The Walking Dead, which yes is about the dead coming back to life, we aren't sure why they're coming back to life. In The Last of Us game, it's only after those scary and confusing first 20 minutes that we do get a bit of an explanation and summary of the next 20 years during the opening credits. The opening really made me think about the first scene of the other dead, infected movies and shows. I still think that I far prefer the opening of 28 Days Later, infected, not dead, and maybe it'll surprise everyone, but the opening of the Dawn of the Dead remake has to be one of my most favorite infected openings of all time. Even if the rest of the movie is a bit weaker. The series opener of The Walking Dead also felt a bit better, even though it too, in my opinion, suffered from a slow opening with a very long bit of dialogue between two characters in a car. The opening credits. Gorgeous opening credits. It's a popular style to have a camera swooping over multiple grungy abstract visual layers playing over each other in different blend modes with sickly colors. It's been done a lot. Making a Murderer, Game of Thrones, True Detective, The Walking Dead. We've all seen it before, a lot, but it's awesome. The standout for me was seeing the fungus grow into the shape of the United States. Not only does this tell us that the virus is at least affecting the entire country, and probably the world, but the lines growing across it also feels like we're looking at a road trip movie montage where you see the path the travelers took across the US, something our main characters are about to do. At one point, fungus grows tall and thin and gray, and it looks like a cityscape. Again, acting as a clue or metaphor that we're looking at an animated map of the progress of the fungus over the United States, and now we're passing the cities that have been affected. Scene 2. We see another title card. 2003. Now, I bet all the fans of the game are thinking like me, oh, now we're going to see the recreation of the beginning of the game. The first shot of the window, of course, is not how the opening of the game begins, but it is very similar to the game's menu. The curtains are semi-transparent and blowing inward, all like the menu, just very pink and no overgrown vines. But can you imagine if the season ends on that same window, now looking as it would years later into the post-apocalyptic pandemic-infested world? That would be cool. However, it was different enough that my knee-jerk gut reaction was another, oh man, dang it, it's not the opening of the game yet. I really thought it would be exact based on things I saw in the one trailer. And then we saw a brunette girl with dark skin. Were we not even in Sarah's bedroom yet? Who was this? Again, confusion took me out of the story some, but I was still listening. And then Pedro entered. I knew he was playing Joel, so I put two and two together. But what was going on? Why was it even morning? Pedro began to speak. It didn't really seem like that voice, that accent would come from that face. I don't know why, but it didn't really match. And I had not seen any of his previous work, so this wasn't another case of only seeing him in a previous character that I got used to. Tommy looked completely different too. At least I knew who he was right away, but again, I was still struggling to ignore the differences and just focus on this version of the story. I bet those who didn't play the game weren't having these issues. I did like the radio playing in the background, giving a hint of what's to come, although I'm not wild about how the characters all noticed the radio and talked about the mention of Jakarta and then blew it off. When Sarah goes to her bedroom, My confusion followed as I'm still trying to see how this relates to what the game was doing. The fan on her face, was that a reference to the spores being airborne in the game? I did hear they were switching to tentacles, or was I reading too much into the fan? It's a pretty tight shot on her face with nothing else in frame. To push the fan that close to her face really makes me think it was done to suggest something. And what's the knife about? Why was the watch not in the box? Joel and Sarah go outside and see their neighbors. Obviously, the neighbors are going to play a larger part. Textbook filmmaking, introduce characters now so they can help tell the story of change later on. Now Tommy gets into the car and they all drive off. So wait, Sarah wakes up in her bedroom, we see a watch, they drive away from the house with Tommy. That's enough similarities with the opening that I thought, so this was a remake of the opening? Is that how much it differed? Well, Scene 3. Apparently, it was not the remake of the opening because now we're in school. But I really like this part. The shaking light coming from a shaking student. I like starting so subtle that we believe, even knowing what's to come, that other characters would not think much of it. This is the first scene where I felt comfortable watching because I wasn't actively trying to compare it to the game. The show is completely in its own element now, and I'm quite content with it. I still don't love it as much as the openings of the other shows and movies that I'd mentioned before, like The Walking Dead and 28 Days Later and the Dawn of the Dead remake. But this is good, solid. Then Sarah gets on a bus. I figured we'd see the next level of infection severity in a more closed location, but no, which was disappointing. I get why the scene's there, I think, to show that she's traveled a great distance and is putting a lot of effort into her father's watch. It also gives us time to continue to form a bond with the character. And then I saw what I thought was another reference to the game's opening. In the clock shop, there's cop cars that speed past the window, just as they do when Sarah comes downstairs in the game. Of course, in the game, the cars drive to the left, and here they drive to the right. I bring up direction because, like the opening window shot, there are other examples of the show keeping the same angles as the game, so it's notable when they didn't do that. And then I got super excited when the panicked lady came in saying they have to close, once again bringing me back to the feeling of the Dawn of the Dead remake. I liked the tension, I liked the unnerving quiet outside, and that it once again gave us a chance to get familiar with what the city looks like before its collapse. Scene 4 was a little confusing. Whose house was that? Oh, there's that sick old lady in the wheelchair, but then there's this other lady there too. Where did the guy go? What was his relation to her? Who's this new lady, and what's her relation to the wheelchair lady? Why is Sarah at this house now? We start to see a lot of the old lady in the wheelchair framed in the background and out of focus. Obviously, the showrunners are setting something up. I believe the filmmakers know that we know something is up, and now that we all know something is going to happen, the filmmakers were just going to play with when and how they did it. I did like how it was a fairly gradual scare. The gradual movements, the slow, wide opening of the mouth, all deeply out of focus, but not so much that we didn't have an idea of what was happening. I like how we're uncomfortably close in single shots when Sarah and her neighbor are back in the kitchen. It made me feel unfairly constricted, not being able to scout the surroundings for the possibility of a scary, infected old lady attacking. I liked how when Sarah does go back through the living room, the old lady's back to normal, but the whimpering, scared dog is... uh-oh. Outside, the sky is a very, very weird pink. I thought my TV colors were messed up. That was a bit of a distraction. I didn't really care for it. It didn't look like the kind of dusk that I'm used to seeing in real life or in other shows, other than Paper Girls before the events of Halloween. The Air Force jets were a nice touch, though. Scene 5. Okay, now come on, this has to be the official remake of the game's opening, right? It's nighttime, couch, TV, Sarah alone. Oh my god, and now Joel. This has to be it. And yes, it most certainly is. The watch gift, joking it's not working, literally saying she sold hardcore drugs to afford it, cutting to her having fallen asleep in his lap. I like the added Curtis and Viper 2 nod, a movie mentioned in the Last of Us Part 2 game. And now it changes again with a phone call and Tommy in prison. I didn't understand how that was going to benefit the story. I didn't know why make Tommy out to seem like a bad guy. When the explosions start happening, what's with all the neon-colored explosions? I never figured that out and it seemed weird, but we were clearly still in the show's version of the game's opening. I was cautiously into it. I was glad to see the dog wasn't killed, as is usually the case with animals in horror. Hey, there's the guy again. Blood. Cool. I guess he was the old lady's husband, not a second caretaker. Okay, now I realize that, which was taking away from the immersion again, but I got it now. His help me was odd. Whispering, I guess, made sense, but it looked like his neck was so badly damaged that I expected it to be a strained voice, not a panicked whisper. Okay, so now we, who originally knew this virus spread by air, had our first visual confirmation that this was indeed tendrils. Although at first I thought it was a mouthful of hair, so it was a moment of cool. Wait, what is that? Oh, okay, it's tendrils, cool. It was kind of weird to hear so much mouth breathing when it looked like the mouth was so stuffed with fungus, and I didn't care much for how the old lady tried to lunge at Sarah. The scream was a frightening sound, but it didn't feel like the sound was coming from that old lady's mouth. Her mouth didn't seem to move any differently to produce a scream, and again, her mouth is full. The lunge, too, seemed a bit slow and cumbersome. She's an old lady who was wheelchair-bound, so I didn't expect an Olympic performance, but I blame the show for setting up expectations with the dramatic, scary build-up ending in a horrific scream. I expected a serious lunge. When Sarah gets outside and the old lady follows, now the old lady is moving with extra power, and it further made that initial jolt feel lame. I like the narrow vision of the truck, only seeing the minimal amount the headlights illuminated, and the turning of the truck made me anticipate a scary reveal. I was kind of right. It's just kind of weird that the one caretaker actually looked like the infection was much further ahead as she jerked around, while the guy we saw was just slowly meandering around. Shot for shot. I love it. And the stranded family, Jimmy's burning farm on the other side of the road, but okay. Driving up to a highway and seeing all the taillights. No hospital. No patient running up and slamming into the back window. Driving through the small town main street was great. I saw the movie theater, though not at the end of the street. It wasn't what blew up. The airplanes I thought were awesome, although they looked a bit too CGI-ish. It still looked great, and it's not because I know a TV show wouldn't actually crash a real airplane. I've seen CGI plenty of times before without knowing it was CGI until later, so I know it's possible to trick me. This didn't, but it was still fun, if not just a tiny bit distracting. I do love that they used something practical for the explosion. The light of the fire reflecting on the walls and the backs of the people had to be real. It wouldn't surprise me if the filmmakers also at least set off some sort of controlled explosion. I really liked how the one guy sat up inhumanely fast with no sound, and then when inside the restaurant there's that inhuman leap. Of course, Sarah's death was a lot like the show. I thought they did it well, although at this point I realized that I hadn't yet gotten a sense of the cinematography style. There was no real unusual or epic cinematography. It felt basic in the framing and the use of handheld, although I understand the choice for handheld when things are uncertain and scary. But the overall look of the show at this point didn't seem yet to have a specific look specific to this show. For example, The Walking Dead has the 16mm film, the desaturated look in both the set and wardrobe design and how the show's color graded. 28 Days Later took the unusual step to use mini DV, but they did that to get the camera on very high and unusual angles. The Dawn of the Dead remake has the overly warm, saturated color grade, fairly consistent lighting. This show, however, nothing is bad. I just don't know if they're going for a specific look or just shooting. I really liked that they used the exact same music as the game did for this specific scene. It wasn't just an almost shot-for-shot remake. The music sounded so identical to the game, I wondered if it literally was the same recording. I saw they had Gustavo's name in the credits for music. Scene 6. 20 years later, just like the game. So now we're going to see Joel waking up. Oh, wait, no. Speaking of The Walking Dead, I thought this child was an homage to the girl at the gas station in the first episode of The Walking Dead. Certainly it's clear this show wanted us to believe we were looking at someone infected. Showing just the one side of their face, I thought that maybe we'd get a reveal of the other side to show a half-faced infection. Or was this Ellie? Close-up of the shoes again. Obviously, the show wants us to remember that, so we will be seeing those shoes again. Regardless, it had me interested. Oh, Boston, aha. Still, is this Ellie? Here, I was a bit disappointed. I didn't really like the look of the federal walls. I don't know if the lookout portion of the towers were CGI, but they looked it. The walls themselves looked like they were really there, but they also looked fake. All I could envision was people scrubbing a surface down to make it look weathered. The Fedra guards came off as background actors that had no experience actually being in any kind of law enforcement or army, but maybe the show wanted to suggest that Fedra is a sort of rinky-dink operation in this post-apocalyptic world. It's clear they don't have much inside in terms of technology and equipment, so maybe they don't have much manpower either. I don't really understand the need for this scene other than to keep fans of the game guessing. They scan the child and we learn from seeing the sneakers again that the child was killed, so we know what the red light on the scanner means, and we see Joel is the one delivering the child, so we know Joel is at least in driving distance of Boston now. But I feel that all could have been explained just fine without the child's scenes. Just show the Boston title under Joel. Just let us experience the scanning scene when he, Tess, and Ellie are caught outside federal walls. Were they still filming on location in Canada? Because from this point on, all the walls, both outside and inside, look like the backlot at Universal Florida. Everything looked fake. Everything looked like fake walls covered in a mild gray spray to look like dust. The curbs looked fake. I bet I could punch the curb and not get hurt because it was made of plaster and foam. I thought I was going to see a trolley of tourists drive by taking pictures with an announcer wearing a hat with the state of Florida on it saying, "Welcome to Boston. This is the soundstage where they filmed HBO's The Last of Us." Scene 7, I'm so that Joel has a secret deal with some of the Fedra people. I like the idea of showing that even when rebuilding society, there's going to be backroom deals and all kinds of bad stuff going on. And after the episode ends, you see why they focused on one particular Fedra guard, because we see him later. We needed to remember his face. But why did we need Joel to have a connection with the Fedra soldier who catches them? I suppose it's to illustrate how far he'd go, all ready to protect a daughter-like figure, even if it means destroying a man he knew. But it's not like Joel was friends with the soldier. I didn't really feel like Joel knowing the guy made the scene any more dramatic than if he didn't know the soldier. And I get that for this telling of the story, Joel needs a Fedra vehicle, so that's another reason why he met with this soldier in secret, but I don't yet know why the filmmakers thought a Fedra vehicle is a better way to tell the story. And I feel, even so, it could still have been told to us in a way that didn't require the whole drug trade scene. I guess that links to the deal about the car battery, but again, why all of this rather than just more simply the way the game did it? As someone familiar with the game, it felt like filler more than an interesting way to delve more into the world. Scene 8. Interestingly enough, I had a hard time fully understanding what was going on in this moment in the game, just as much as I didn't fully understand it at first in the show. I got it eventually. The scene here explained it better for me than the show. But by the way, another distraction, that's Anna Torv. I love the Netflix show Mindhunter, and she plays Wendy Carr, so again, I'm a little distracted with casting, but that's not the filmmaker's fault. Actors are in a lot of different things. This looks so much like the Universal backlot. Come on. Does anyone think this really looks like a real street? If it is a real street in Canada, why do Canadians live on a TV show backlot? Look at those brick stone chunks. If that isn't a big old block of styrofoam. Scene 9. And here we finally are, Ellie. I don't want to say exactly why I'm not yet on board with this casting, so I'm actually going to just not talk about that. I did love the kick of the food tray, knowing that this was the actress who was playing Ellie, and the name Ellie was being kept for the show. I was confused when I heard her say her name was Veronica. Now I'm taken out of the show again due to some confusion. I wasn't entirely sold on her performance. Knowing what I know about the future of the story, I know she needs to be tough, but it didn't seem rightly placed here. I can't explain why, but it felt off. Maybe it was how she performed it. Maybe I'm just too used to seeing it another way. Scene 10, this was a cool addition to the game. I liked the scene, I liked both performances, I liked what additions it brought to the story and how it was presented. I liked that it adds to Joel's need to travel. It's not just for a transportation job, he has personal reasons for going out on a search. When Joel was moving aside the wardrobe, it kind of felt like the game again. And look at those particles. Is that another reference or homage to the airborne spores of the game? I wonder if people not familiar with the game saw that and thought the virus was airborne, or just thought they were being shown how dusty the place is. Scene 11. He took drugs also. Not too crazy of a change, but why the change? Maybe they'll explain. The rest of the scene with Tess was of course familiar to players of the game. Scene 12. I like these new Firefly scenes. The sets still look god-awful, totally fake, but I like the extra story and character development. I like the extra scenes with Ellie and the story setup. I don't think they've over-explained anything here. It's a good scene. Not my favorite acting, again, by Bella Ramsey. This again may just be due to being so familiar with another actor's performance. Scene 13. I guess I'd have no chance in this world because I was not in the least bit startled at the apparent jump scare seeing the infected fused to the wall. It looked great, but for some reason I just wasn't startled at all. I'm not sure why Tess was so startled either, considering how experienced she seems to be in the world. I guess it was just to help sell the jump scare, but it didn't work for me. She had no problem talking a big game while surrounded by 3 men with guns who beat her up. They've been dealing with infected for 20 years. I just can't buy that she'd be that startled. She even says she knows that the infected person is done. The hallway scene was fine. Again, I was a bit distracted with trying not to compare it to the game. I like Joel keeping the knife pinned under his foot. I like the short explanation as to why he would have to take Ellie and not one of the other Fireflys because she was missing an ear. Scene 14. This actually could be, or pass for, a real street. Good job, however it was done. I liked how the show presents Ellie as being pretty smart, decoding the radio songs. I'm still not wild about Bella's performance. They escape more Fedra guards who all look like actors that weren't really given much direction, just blank expressions, every one of them. Why did the Fedra guard who did find them have to be peeing? I thought Ellie's reaction watching Joel beat the guard to death was odd. She looked into it, but then after the show there was an inside the episode, and please HBO do this after every episode, and in that they explained that she was meant to appear into it. They wanted the audience to know that she felt good that someone was finally protecting her. Well, okay. And it sounded to me on my first viewing, not so much my second, that the music playing before Joel starts wailing on the guard, the deep, suspenseful music, it sounds exactly like the music that plays at the end of The Last of Us 2 when Ellie is killing Abby. I did not like how Bella said the lines about her infection. I felt like it was a rushed, cold read of a script. Damn it, I really want to like her performance, but so far this entire episode, I just don't like it. Ending with the 80s song without any other info, allowing the audience to remember a few minutes before what 80s music meant was a nice touch, especially after all the exposition. And getting an even closer view for the first time of the complete destruction of the city in the final shot was great too. In the end, I thought there was a lot of good stuff and some great stuff. I need to work on not actively comparing it to the game. I don't care if it's not like the game, it can be its own thing, but it's cool to see when it is like the game. I'm not over the moon about any of the performances, but they were all solid enough, except for Bella Ramsey again. And again, maybe that's because I'm just so used to the character being played by someone else. Time will tell. Cinematography is fine, but I don't feel the show has its own look and style yet. You know when you're watching a Wes Anderson film, or David Fincher, or Tim Burton, or Quentin Tarantino, or even Michael Bay. You know when you're watching TV shows like The Walking Dead, or Mr. Robot, or Hannibal, or Handmaid's Tale. They all have their own distinct look. The Last of Us does not. In the end, I'm happy with the show. I'm happy enough to continue watching. I hope it grows on me like a fungus. And that's about all I can say right now. I want this show to do well. I hope I end up liking it more and more as the season goes on. I hope I can forget comparing it to the game. I'm happy for it to be its own thing. I'm ready for episode 2. Let's do this.